everybody. Thank you for joining this week's Pilates Hour. Really excited to be here again, looking at another exercise breakdown. And I get lots and lots of questions about the standing arm work on the trap table. So I thought, well, let's look at that one today. There's quite a bit to offer and share and talk about. Let's dive into the standing arm series. And I thought we might start just by looking at, I just made a list of some of the exercises that are part of this series. And of course, every school teaches a little bit different variations. I think there's kind of a core bit of exercises that we all do, and then people have their preferences and do variations and things. So we have both facing in, where we're looking at the trap table, and facing out, where we're facing away from the trap table. Some of the common ones that we do facing in, we might set the springs up high and push down a little bit. So a little bit moving towards shoulder extension, but not actually getting back there yet, but pushing down. I love that one for the feeling of getting the weight forward into the foot. And we're going to talk about alignment and weight placement and things like that as we get into it. So I really like that for that reason. It also is a great place to start to make the connection of the arm to the trunk, which we're also going to talk about. And then if we move the springs down a little bit and the point of where the spring is connected, then we can start to pull back a little bit more and get into some shoulder extension, which I think is really valuable because we don't go there very often. And when we do, I always think, is it very good form? Do people really have the best alignment and mobility through their shoulder? We have upper arm control. That's kind of the circular one. It makes me think of when little kids talk about trains, right? And they do this motion with their arms. So it's the circling forward and back that we have. The great thing is that we're on two independent springs, different than when we're on the reformer and the springs are attached to the carriage and then the pulleys are attached to the carriage and we just have that one line. But we can do some of these motions in a little bit more of a bicycle, one and then the other, or just work on one at a time. So some nice options there. Some basic rowing at the top, when the bar is at the kind of middle place, you've got some rowing that we can do. And then looking at some different ones of maybe going into rotation. And we do this, I think it's pretty common that people are going into rotation. And then we have rotation like that when we're facing the other direction, going forward and back. And I've started recently with the facing out, you're doing lunging. I've started doing lunging while we're facing in. So our main movements, pressing down, the spring is attached up high, bring the spring down a little bit and pull back. So we've got pulling back this way into shoulder extension. We also have the upper arm control. That's when I was kind of making this motion that how little kids talk about trains, at least the kids I know. And that's kind of a similar motion of the upper arm control circle. I mentioned that we have rowing, not like the rowing series, but just rowing as if you might do rowing in the gym. If you turn that into one arm, it can just be a single arm row, but it can also be rotation. We have the same thing when we flip around, when we're facing out and we're doing some of the punching, some of the lunging, and we can do it with just the arm, or we can add the torso and have a little bit of rotation. So I thought, well, if it's good facing one way, that's like doing the 100 face up and then doing the 100 face down. If it's good one way, it's probably good the other way. So now I've been practicing and just playing around with lunging backward while I'm facing the spring. So we'll take a look at those in a second. When we're facing now out, we have a lot of similar motions to what we might do on the reformer. So we have salute or hug a tree as we're standing there, leaning a little bit more now into the spring. Like I said, we have some punching motions. We can do serving where the palms are up. We could turn it into more of a push-up preparation where the palms are facing outward. So if you're having somebody who wants to learn how to do a push-up, but the load of their body against gravity on the floor, or even sometimes against the trap table, is just a little too much for them to manage, you can do the push-up here. And that's where we do need to look at, and we'll talk about it a little bit, of where the springs are set for which of all of these different movements. So that's a push-up. We can turn it into, again, now changing a little bit through the hand position, more of the punching. And then does that have rotation or not? So are we looking at to have control of the body and movement of the arm and shoulder? Or are we looking to coordinate that with the body rotating? All of that can have a lunge, right? One foot stepping forward, one foot stepping back, or it doesn't have to have the lunge. So lots of different combinations. And then the last two that we usually talk about, because they have a little bit more going on, are the butterfly and the twist. So those are kind of the final pieces that we put together after we know people have all of these different motions and awareness. Now can we change the choreography a little bit and make it more like the rowing series, right? The rowing series on the reformer. It's not that different of movement, right? It's just circling the arms, and maybe they're in, or maybe they're up, maybe they're reaching forward, but it's now in a whole line of choreography. So that's some of the challenges of it. Although hopefully people are able to have good alignment because we've worked on this so many times. And so just thinking about the ideas behind all of this motion. So I'm in the middle of, and I think some people have joined that are part of the transition intensive. So our bridging course, I'm in the middle of teaching that right now. We're having a blast every few minutes. There's another epiphany that happens with somebody, and it just warms my heart because it's this great collaboration from everybody's vast experience of being trained Pilates teachers, and us all getting together to be able to share and then talk about what's some of the unique points of Polestar and how we approach movement. So we're in the middle of that, which is exciting. And we've been talking a lot about the difference between scapular movement, right? So we have the basics of elevation, depression, retraction, protraction. And then when the arm moves, we have the rotation, which I am guilty of really making it as if your shoulder blade goes 360. It doesn't, but to get that idea, that sense of the upward rotation of the scapula so that we maintain really good congruency of the head of the humerus to the socket, which is on the side of the shoulder blade or the scapula. And I kind of think of it almost as if the shoulder blade is chasing, right? The arm starts to move, and as it gets to a certain point, there's no longer really great congruency of the head of the humerus into the socket. So the socket gets to change, and the socket kind of goes with and comes around. So we've been talking about the difference between that movement of the shoulder blade and the actual movement of the arm and the connections to the body. So we have the shoulder blade connection to the trunk, which is kind of it's not really a joint, but we kind of look at it as a joint of how the shoulder blade sits on the rib wall. Then you've got the arm connection to the body. Probably the biggest part is muscularly is through the lats, and we can talk a little bit about that, not to cue it, but to be able to differentiate between someone's shoulders are maybe up a little down a bit, and we're asking them to push them down, or we're asking them to push their arm down, but they're interpreting that as push their shoulder down. And so just to be really clear with our intention, clear with our cueing, and then watching and making sure that whatever we've said has been interpreted the right way. to make those differences. So that's one of the pieces of it. And then just to look again at the whole symmetry through the head, through the shoulders, making sure that the head is in line with the trunk, that we haven't allowed some part of the body to go forward or back in and around the shoulder girdle. One of the things that we were just playing with this yesterday is taking the preparation. If you were going to do the frog facing out on the chair, so you'll have to imagine, I don't have my chair here right now, but you're facing out on the chair, sitting on the top, hands are down, feet are on the pedals, and you propel yourself forward either in a vertical body, or sometimes it's taught in a bit of a diagonal, but we're taking the shoulder into extension and holding and suspending our bodies there. Not so easy. Luckily, we have the pedals. They're holding us up. But it's a lot for somebody to manage their alignment and manage the load of their body weight now suspended out in space. So we teach the preparation, which is to sit on the floor. We sometimes call it the tricep press. I'm always thinking it's the preparation to get somebody up into the frog. And when we're sitting on the floor or sitting on a small cushion or box or something, we're able to put here the arms in this position. But now all I have to manage is my arms against the springs, right, against the pedals. And they're actually assisting me in some of these different motions we might do, which is elevation and depression. And then getting into the tricep press itself of bending and straightening the elbow. So those are some that I love for this idea of shoulder extension, because we don't live back here very much. We want to be careful. We want to be looking for the idea that the front of the head of the shoulder, the head of the humerus, is flush to the rest of the body. And as we're in some of the movements pulling back, we can see, is it translating and rolling forward or pushing up, which would not be so safe, not really good alignment, or is it able to stay and the rest of my arm moves behind? So you can think of other exercises where we're in that position. Something kind of basic like dart, lying on the mat prone, pressing the arms up. And you guys can all practice this, even if you're just sitting at a chair at your desk, of how is your own shoulder movement when you place your arm behind? Does the head of the humerus, the front of the shoulder, translate forward? Does it, the whole shoulder blade, everything rolls forward? Or can you keep the front of the chest open and press your arm back? And then if you see this rounding, that's fine. There's no problem there. So that's some of the things that we're going to think about in the shoulder. And we'll talk about some more exercises. The torso, and I tried to figure out how I could show it today, and I couldn't make it happen. So I'll show it again in another, or maybe I'll do something for Melissa sending out the notes and things. We could maybe send something out with this image, but I've been trying to come up with ways to talk about alignment, right, of just our trunk. And quite often we see people where, I'm trying to get my arms out of the way, the ribs are a little forward, the pelvis is a little bit back. And, as the average person walking around, this is probably not the worst posture that somebody could be in, but could we get the rib cage back a little bit on top of the pelvis and the pelvis a little bit more under the rib cage without anything like tucking or pulling or anything like that? And I thought about when you put, stack up some books, whether they're lying down or on a bookshelf, and one's back a little bit and one's a little too forward, and you kind of just get everything to where you push it to where everything's in line. That's one of the things that I've been kind of the ideas of getting the body into a more neutral position. And remember, neutral just means that we have all of the available range of motion of that joint or all of the joints that we're talking about. So it's not a position to be held. It's really more of an idea of where does the joint have the most options for movement, whether it's my spine, my shoulder, my hip, wherever it is. So that's something I've been thinking about in the torso. And it's tough when we're doing the standing arm work because there's some pull. We're having to pull or push on the springs, and it's really easy to get out of that alignment. So just some things to think about there. And I encourage you to explore first in your own bodies, maybe with your phone, and you can take pictures or video of your body. And then with the people that you're working with is how does what we call their ideal, their neutral position, how does it change when they're in standing to when they're lying supine, when they're lying prone, when they're side lying, when they're in a handstand, right? How does that change as we're in all these different orientations to gravity? And the curves will be more pronounced or less pronounced depending on how we are. They're less pronounced when we're lying down because gravity is pulling us down. So sometimes as new teachers come to me and they say, well, my client looks like this in standing, but looks like something very different when they're lying down. And it's like, yes, yes, they do, because it's just a different orientation to gravity. So then we can look at the legs. And one of the things that we're encouraging people to do on the facing out is to lean forward. And if you've been to any other Pilates hour ever or heard Brent talk about joints that need mobility for daily life, one of them you hear often is the ankle and ankle dorsiflexion, or pulling the toes back towards your shin. And this is where we can do that in standing and really look at how much does somebody have. And you might need to put something under the heel. So we do that for things like the squat, right? If my squat isn't very deep because I don't have much ankle mobility, I can prop my heels up on something. And now I don't have to fight that joint that doesn't have the mobility. And I can go deeper into my squat or lunges or different things that I might need to do. The same here. I'm going to put my foot out. So obviously ignore this foot. As I'm going into my lunge forward, the springs are here. It does require me to have a good amount of ankle dorsiflexion. So you might look at propping the heel up a little bit, and look at the foot too. Are the toes and the front part of the foot really active in a holding on feeling, right? Are they kind of gripping for dear life? Or can the foot be in its more expansive position, right? The foot is supple when it needs to be. So our feet can expand a little bit and have these great bases of support out in front of us. So we want that, but you might see some struggling there. And if you do, and if you remember, oh, wow, yeah, they have not so much dorsiflexion, put something under their heel a little bit, not too much because, you don't want them to tip over, but a little height under the heel would really help that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. When we're facing inward, we often talk about, people in general, Pilates teachers, fitness teachers, talk about our standing posture as vertical, and it is. It does have a very slight lean forward, though, again, to take advantage of the foot. You don't have anything behind you helping you hold yourself up. And if you're doing exercises where you're, instead of the place where you can lift your heels up and down really easily, you're back here, now I'm at real risk of falling backwards. And I'm using some of the front leg muscles to hold me up as opposed to efficiently leaning into my feet and letting that hold me. And you could do too much, right, in this direction. We don't want to be here. But I just kind of look at where can you lift your heels up and down just a little bit. That's probably a pretty good place to be for your standing posture. So just be mindful if you're having people line up over their heels, it's probably a little too far back. We see this often in the standing leg pump on the chair. And I'm going to use my hand so I can artificially lean back a little bit. And you'll see people put their foot on the pedal and do their standing leg pump. And if they let go, they're going to fall over backwards. So think about it as if you were to push something down, and then you were going to take your next step onto the next surface and go up there. So you really need to get the body weight forward for propulsion, for our movement, our responsiveness, and just walking, right? That's how our walking is going to be. So when we're facing in, that's just have that in mind as you're setting people up. And again, just a little bounce, a little heel lift. Doesn't have to be a high heel raise, but that'll help you set up where you have, I guess, the best control, but also the most efficiency in your standing position. All right. Great. Okay. Leslie was asking, do you encourage the head of the shoulder to roll back when moving into extension to follow the movement of the arm? Well, not really. It actually rolls forward. So if we think about it, this is kind of a gross generalization, right? But the head of the humerus, right? Here's my arm bone. There's the head. As my elbow moves back, right, as I'm doing this motion, this part actually is rolling a little bit forward. So the roll part of it, if this was my humerus, it's doing that, right? More probably with that, right? Because the joint is more to the side. So that's what's happening there. So the roll part does, but it doesn't translate forward. So the head of my humerus shouldn't move forward this way. And we will see that sometimes, that type of a movement. And especially if there's weight bearing, if I'm pushing against something, it could come forward. And that reminds me of when I was a gymnast years and years ago. It was a long time ago. We had a girl fall, a high level gymnast. She was back. It was so long ago that it was class 3, 2, 1 and elite, no longer the level 10 elite. And she fell backwards into the ground and dislocated her shoulder. And it makes me, every time we talk about shoulder stuff, makes me think of her. And it was it was bad, a full dislocation. So we don't want to have force going that way. So I hope that answers your question, but it does roll, because that's the movement of the joint. All right. So, and Sarah was asking, I'd be interested to know more about the arm to trunk connection. Yeah. So arm to trunk, I'm thinking probably mostly of lat. There's one of the teres there, but the lat is the one that I'm thinking about the most, attaches to the arm, attaches in to the back. And it's a way that we can, and you can just do it, you can do it on your own. Pressing into something might be the spring, might be a bar, might be the floor, whatever it is. You have that ability to push and activate there, which is different than pushing your shoulder blade down. And they can go together. But if we think about control, dynamic stability, once the shoulder blade is in its place for a movement where my arm is going to be moving around a lot, but maybe I'm just trying to get some leverage and push, the shoulder blade itself is no longer going to move. It's not rigid. It still can respond if my arm goes in a different position or my trunk starts to move, but there is a control there where the arm is steady or the shoulder blade is steady, and I can push. And it gives you that when people talk about pushing down and feeling length, that's one of the things that can give you that sense of elongation. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And then Leslie had a follow-up question. That's great. I'm happy to answer. How would you cue the movement then? I tend to cue rolling the head back to minimize the forward movement. Great question. So you might have heard Brent talk about this before, and I probably have talked about it as well. So if you think about your collarbone, right, you've got your collarbone going out here, and you have the spine of your scapula right here. It kind of, if you were to look from the top, right, if somebody was looking above you and looking down at your shoulder, you could see the collarbone, you could see the spine of the scapula, and they come to a point and kind of meet out here where the shoulder joint is. So we think about it as a little bit of an arrow or a triangle that's pointing toward the shoulder itself. On most people, because we are here so much of the time doing things like this on our phones and computers and driving and just sedentary, that point used to point out to the sides. The point of it now kind of points forward. So the shoulder blades are maybe a little protracted. They're a little wider than normal. The chest is a little tighter than normal, or just being held in this position. And we no longer have this. So I think what maybe you're cueing, or what you want to be cueing, is width at the front of the chest. And in that case, yes, it does go back. And I think about it going wide and then back. And I teach rowing this way too. And we were practicing this yesterday and in my class that I teach at the center, of when people do rowing. And I haven't been in a gym in a long time, so I don't look there, but I see in classes and things, and it always looks kind of close, right? You're doing it. Here we go. And I wonder what's going on. What's happening there? What are we working on? What am I trying to learn to do that? What do I want as a teacher? So as I'm doing it, what I'd like is a sense of width. And so you can do this where you're sitting. So wherever you are, get to this position. I'm in kind of 90 degrees. That feels comfortable for your body. And if I was to do it sideways, I'm kind of thinking of getting my forearm to touch my computer screen, right? Before it goes around to the back. And as my arm is continuing to go back, there is some retraction, but it's now at the end of the movement. And I'm thinking about my collarbone, my arm, and my scapula all doing this little dance together. So maybe that's what you're thinking about, Leslie, in that. So it's not that the head of the humerus rolls back. It could move back. Moving back is okay. But get into this idea that the whole shoulder girdle, it's almost like if you had a shoulder blade in the front that matched your shoulder blade in the back, and you had this little dance happening. That might be a little better way to think of it. I hope that makes sense. Great. And all right, Jenny has a question about, can you explain if there's scapular movement in the scapula while doing chest expansion? Are we trying to keep it stable? Good. Another good question. I love it. So chest expansion, we do often on the reformer. And we also I do it sometimes in mat classes. I do it in high kneeling. I do it in different positions. We can definitely do it as part of our work on the trap table. So chest expansion to me, and again, I don't know, I can't speak for how anybody else teaches it. When I'm teaching it, I'm kind of having that same collarbone, shoulder blade, arm feeling. Because what I don't want to do is pull my arms back and arch my chest forward. And that's often what I see. So timing wise, and again, you guys can try this if you're watching where you have some space to move, pull the arms back. Once your arms get about to the side of your body, your side seams, then start to open the front and then bring your shoulder blades together in that timing. Almost again, if something in the front pushed your arm and then pushed your shoulder blade together, just as an image. And see if you feel a difference with that versus, again, just even shoulder blades together. Because I think we're missing some of the three-dimensional part of the movement. So that's how I teach chest expansion, because it does expand my chest, but I'm still working to keep my more neutral body alignment, because otherwise it's all just kind of going together. All right, good. Thank you guys for the questions. Keep asking. But let's take a look at the lunging that I mentioned, which is not traditional. with the arm springs facing in. And you might have noticed, I know I'm crazy, but I'm not, I'm not crazy. I put these up here with different heights on purpose, because I want to show that when we start facing out, what it looks like. And I'll adjust my camera maybe a little bit, because people ask all the time, where do I put this bar? Where do I put the spring? Oh, I've, used to talk about it has to be at exactly the armpit height. But what does that really mean? And is that good for everybody? So we can talk about that a little bit. So if I bring both springs down, this is about my eye level. I can start into, and I might actually hold up a little bit higher just because I'll run out of room. We talked about doing rotation. Here's another place that I can work on. Even if my arm is going to be down this way, getting ready for upper arm control, I can still think of that feeling of wide through the shoulder before I retract. And then I thought, well, we're lunging facing forward. So can we not lunge facing back? Can I do same arm and move? Can I do it going opposite? And what might I get out of that? And I like this, and I'm making it a little bit short. Again, I only have so much space in my studio, but I like it as a way to, we're often walking forward. We don't often step back. And for somebody who maybe is a little deconditioned, a little bit more sedentary, or just doesn't move in that way, it's really interesting to move where you can't see something. And the balance is different. And it's not huge, but it could be for somebody. So thinking about, just like we decide in the twist or some of the exercises, if you're going to twist the torso, should the pelvis be held tight so it doesn't move? Can it move? Should it be feeling like it's moving against it? And you have to make those decisions based on the mobility that your person has or how you have. If I don't have very much trunk rotation, I'm probably going to do better in the whole movement, not in trunk rotation, but in the whole movement of allowing my pelvis and my body to kind of go in the same direction. I'm not getting a lot of rotation, but if I did the opposite, I probably wouldn't go very far. It doesn't feel very satisfying, kind of feels awkward. So start where people can do the movement. So I might do something this way with them, pulling back on the springs, going here. Once they've got that, now I can go into the more rotation, ringing, that type of feeling. I'm going to step back with this foot and go here. So now I'm getting a little bit more stretch in opposition, and that's going to give me the ability to rotate my trunk, because my pelvis is, just by the nature of the stepping back, is being held a little bit more in place. So just some ways to think about doing that. And I still get questions about the upper arm control of, do I put my upper arm just to vertical, right? So if I was going to pull in, do I just pull to here, or can I pull a little bit farther back? And it's going to be dependent on which springs you're using and how much you can press with the tricep. I have the longer, light, long springs on in Balanced Body. They're yellow. There's also short yellow. So if you're using the shorter ones, you might run out of room if you push all the way back here. You might have the right amount of tension on the spring if you keep the arm where it is. But I don't prevent people from going back here, because we need to have that range of motion, right? Think of going into leg pull. If I'm in a plank facing upward, my arm is going to be back here. So I'd like to condition all of the tissues there to be able to handle the load of supporting my body weight. So make the decision. It doesn't really matter, right? It's depends type of moment of going back or front, but one is not right or wrong or necessarily better than the other. It's just different, but have a reason why. I only have long springs. I'm going to push back so I get tension. That's a good reason, right? I only have short springs. The client can't go any farther back. good reason, right? So that's the upper arm control, and just see what your clients can get. Now, as we go into jumping fast forward into exercises like butterfly and twist, and I think, all right, I'm going to do one thing first. Body position. So when, this makes me think of Beth Kaplanik. We were just working together with some students, and we were talking about people doing the facing out arm work this way, right? I'm a little forward. I'm not vertical, and I'm not back here. But how much farther forward can you get? And we'd really like to find that sense of flying or suspension in this shape. It also makes me think of Dov Cohen. So when we used to work together years ago, we talked about this a lot. The springs are there for a reason. Use them. Get out and get forward so that you can have the position here. And so all of our introductory movement, right, might be some of the punching, could be hug a tree. We're really trying to get people into this shape and not into this shape or this shape, right? Or something where the shoulder is funny, is that elongation out into the flying position. So that's where we're looking again, as I mentioned, about ankle dorsiflexion, which we don't think about in an arm exercise, but it might be really important for somebody. So let me move my camera just a smidge. I'm going to tip it up a little bit so you can see a little bit more of the arm. May not get everything, but at least a little bit more. So again, I'm aware that they're not the same height. Don't send letters to tell me that I had the wrong one on the wrong height. So I'm there on purpose. So you can see how the line of pull is different in these different places. So if I'm moving this arm, it's very much an up and back. This one is a very much out and back. And so when we're doing, I'm going to do a little bit of the twist just to see it. It doesn't matter so much, but it matters. So you're going to meet the person where they are. If this spring is very low, I'm actually running the risk of hitting the spring on my head. So depending on how tall I am, this might have to be a little bit higher. I want to bypass that. And also as I lean more or I lean less, that angle is going to change. So it's not an exact place. But as we start to windmill the arms, there's a huge amount of pushing down now from the higher spring, which I like the feeling because it helps me feel like I'm getting up. So that is a nice feeling. And then as I'm here with this spring, now it's not pulling me so much, but I'm really encouraged to push back, right? So instead of the down feeling, I'm actually pushing beyond myself as I'm holding the twisted position. So play around with it. I think, and you know me, I like to try all things in all different ways. Where does it help the client get more of whatever quality it is that you want? Maybe you want a little bit more chest expansion at the back of the twist. Maybe you're looking for that feeling. Maybe you're looking, even though we're on a lean, you're looking for a little bit more axial length. Maybe put the springs a little bit higher and see how people do with it. You do have to be mindful of the arm to shoulder position. So in our screening, we look at goalposts. We look at, can somebody stand in neutral? Do they have the shoulder range of motion and rotation to get their arms to here? And can they maintain that as they stretch up? Do they have enough chest pliability, right? The muscles and the fascia, does that have extensibility? Does the back of the shoulder, the lat, all of that have the extensibility to even get here? And then how do we move up here? remembering that we have that bit of external or upward rotation as the arm is going up. So anytime that the arms are up, you should be feeling, and I have clients and I do it myself and students do it. It's the feeling of the outer border of your shoulder blade lengthening, right? And you can do that on your own. You can get in there, you kind of grab on and give a lift there, or take the very bottom, if you can get your fingers down toward the bottom of the shoulder blade and on your own body, so you know what it feels like, pull up a little bit. And that's going to start to mimic that feeling of upward rotation. That's kind of a cool thing to do. And clients like it. It's just a guide. You can guide with your hands to get that up there, so that now once you're there, you have a little bit of mobility. That's going to be cool. And then we talked about, is there more shoulder mobility or more shoulder control? Once the arm is up here, now the shoulder blade itself is in more control. It's not moving very much, and I can move my arm around without my shoulder blade moving around. The shoulder blade is now a little bit stable in that position until it needs to move again to do something else. Elaine asked, am I using the long spring? So yes. So the long yellow springs is what I was just using, but I really do use both. I use the short yellow and the long yellow because they give a different feeling. Again, anytime you're using the short springs, you run out of extensibility before you would with the longer spring. So if you just feel like the client is fighting the spring or you're fighting the spring, try the longer one. You're probably going to have to step back a little bit more or step away from the table a little bit more. It changes things, and you don't get the support so soon, right? You push on a yellow spring that's short. It's like, okay, I have support now because I've stretched it out a little bit and that's it. The longer one, you might notice that you go a little bit farther, but you will pick up that feeling. And it just to me, it's a little bit nicer feeling. But use either. Use whichever one really suits the person, suits the exercise. In butterfly, and she says, Elaine, yeah, that's a common. We hear that often, that the short springs on the trapeze table that come with some different manufacturers of springs are quite heavy, and they don't have a light spring. Yeah, so keep writing, whoever makes your equipment, write to them and say, can we get some lighter, springs? Or sometimes we need to ask for heavier springs. Sometimes the springs are too light and not heavy enough. So keep just asking. You never know what they say. They might easily be able to fulfill that. So good to have options. So butterfly is another one. And I know that we in Polestar teach it without side bending, but most other schools do teach it with side bending. Cool. There's two options. So again, not better or worse, just different and interesting. So we do this feeling, and I was thinking, how could I get that sensation? What image? One that comes to mind often is of a big, heavy cape. I'm thinking of like a Dracula at Halloween time, right? That a big, heavy cape that might be velvet, right? And as you're sweeping it around, it has a weight to it. And I thought, well, what's the shoulder blade doing? As I'm coming around, my shoulder blade is upwardly rotating, but I also think about it as something that pushes me around. I know. I come up with all kinds of images. So I want to hear your images. So I thought, well, let me show, maybe I can show it with a TheraBand. I don't know. We'll see. Of what that might look like. So as I'm coming around, again, I'm also on the back kind of fascial pattern from hip to shoulder. As I'm coming around, right, I can do this way. It's doing this. And that just makes me think of that line of up and around. And we use it with the sensation also that your arm, even though your arm is not really parallel to your ceiling, it still is the sense that this arm is going up, this humerus is going up. And if we think about the idea that the scapula chases the arm bone, right? It's like, whoa, you're moving up. I better move up as well. Now it's almost like my shoulder blade pushes my humerus up. I don't know if that's visible, but that's the feeling I have of when I come around. Now, this is really stable, right? I can hold the weight of the spring and my body, and I'm there. I own it. And then I can do the other movement here. And it would work the same if you were going to come into the rotation piece with the flexion and all the way around. A little bit of, I see it both in side bending and I see it in rotation and flexion. It has the same tensegrity. So as I'm pushing down through my feet, I'm pushing up and out through my arms. So that might help feel like you have a little bit better control of your shoulder joint as you're in some of these overhead positions. Think about what the scapula is doing. Think about what the arm is doing and what needs to be emphasized and what maybe doesn't need to be emphasized so much. Different of, and this is where I was thinking when Sarah asked the question about arm to body, something very basic like supine arm work on the reformer. Lying down, the whole body is supported. Arms should be able to move freely, but I still hear things like move your shoulder blades away from the shoulder rests or the shoulder blocks. Don't let your shoulders touch the shoulder blocks. Well, in a gentle way, again, you can try this. If you take the cues a little bit literal and you push your shoulders down, and don't hurt yourself, push your shoulders down gently, and then try to move your arms. And is there ease? For me, no, I don't feel ease. I feel stuck. Now, just let your shoulders be where they are and move. Right? If the client was like this, then yeah, it's an appropriate cue. Move the shoulders a little bit away from the ears or move the shoulders away from your neck, and then you're getting a little bit more width. So just think about those types of cues because that translates into push through on the trap table, right? If I'm using the tower bar and I'm sitting on the table and I'm holding the bar, as I lean back into the little bit of a hinge backward, what I often see is shoulder protraction. Well, I don't really want that because now there's no support or connection of my shoulder blade or my arm to my body. I need the shoulder blade to be behind me. And then I can push the bar down. I can manage that until I move into my spine stretch. Here's where I need to now have mobility of my shoulder blade as I'm getting closer and closer to being overhead. So again, it's going to have a little bit of movement. So keep that in mind and things like that. Spine stretch is a wonderful place for over protraction. So as people are doing spine stretch, protraction feels like spine flexion, right? Widening of the shoulder blades. Wow, I really feel like I'm flexing my spine. There's a difference, and they do go together. You don't want retraction while you're flexing your spine, but you also don't want too much protraction. So in our cueing and our looking at clients, looking at a whole mat class, if you're seeing this, right, there's either a little too much elevation, a little too much protraction, and they probably don't need it. Their spine probably flexes enough already. So that's, you can just back off from that just a little bit, but it's important to make sure that we're giving our clients and our students this information so that their internal representation is accurate. And we've done it time and time again. Take a picture, look at it. It's like, really? That's what I look like when I'm doing that? And let them start to build those bridges of, this is what I see, this is what I feel. And those can start to come together and be a little bit more accurate or in line with one another. So let's see. All right. Elena was asking about my shoulders are rolled forward. It's good arm exercise to work on chest opening. Yeah, I would say on those things, anything that's gentle. So I'm not a big fan of forceful, oh, well, if the shoulders are here, well, just get them back here. That doesn't really work so much. You might try if it feels like you're unable to make a change. Some people just sit like this. I found myself like this, but I can get up and be here and have a little better posture. If you feel like you can't do that, then what you might want to do is find a good myofascial release therapist, a Feldenkrais practitioner, and people like that can help to make a change to some of the muscular and fascial parts of the front of the chest. If you have pain with it or that doesn't seem to be working, you might go and see a physical therapist and see, is there something going on in your shoulder joint? Is it just that you've been in this position, and profession makes a big impact on that? We've worked over the years with a lot of dentists and dental hygienists who are in this position, right? Different plastic surgeons are in this position for long periods of time. The muscles in the back sometimes get a little bit over lengthened. They don't act as well, right? They aren't as productive to be able to do their job of bringing the shoulder blades back or the chest up or the spine in the more lengthened position. So it kind of depends. But those are some of the things that I would work on if doing just the awareness movement isn't helping. You might try some work on a foam roller, some work on an oove. If you have somebody who teaches the oove, if you've been on that before, there's a lot of wonderful shoulder opening movement there. So that might be something you could look into. But be gentle with it. I'm not a fan of knee to the back and pull the pull the shoulders. So, all right. So once you're understanding the why, any exercises, yeah, I would say a lot of the ones that we just talked about. So a lot of the rowing type motions where we're getting some of the back muscles and the scapular muscles to work. So things like rowing are great, and you can do that in a lot of different places with weights on the Pilates equipment. You can do that. You can do it with a TheraBand, right? So lots of ways to do that type of motion, and things that really incorporate a large range of motion without any discomfort. Arm arcs, arm circles. Again, we're very sometimes in a little bit of a box of your arm circles should only be here, right? But not really. Your arm circles can be broad and big, and maybe you're doing it in a mat class. Maybe you're doing it somewhere where you're not restricted by equipment. So I would try to work in all different motions, coming overhead, doing full motions that way. Just remember to keep the shoulder blade able to move. Don't lock it down, and start to lengthen some of the tissue there, start to strengthen some of the back muscles, just simply sitting upright. So any exercise where you're having to hold yourself in a neutral position would be great. Start working into extension. So a prone press up, right? If I'm here, I'm going to start to work on the shoulders being here and open. I'm going to reach my elbows back, maybe draw the shoulder blades a little bit together, and start working on your prone press up into extension work. And all of those will start to help you to have that little bit better length in the front and a little more control in the back. So good. I hope that this was helpful for everybody. It's fun to get in and explore these exercises. Think of them in all the different pieces of apparatus you have. Do them everywhere. Things like rowing. The rowing exercise is another great place to practice all of the shoulder and arm movement. I teach rowing in my mat classes all the time. I love it. Get into the springs and really, again, play around with the height of the bar. If you go to the top, which springs do you use? Explore what works best for you, what works best for your client, so that you start to understand the relationship of if the spring is higher, if the spring is lower. You'll see it, it'll catch on people's clothing. Well, move it. It hits them in the head. Move it. Then maybe their position will change, and you can change the spring. One that we were just working on, I know we're getting close to time, but one we were just working on in our course is the kneeling arm work to the side on the reformer, where we're in the mermaid position, right? And you're doing the tricep extension, you're holding onto the rope, and you're doing this kneeling with your hand on the shoulder rest. And we're talking about where can you start that? That's a tough exercise for people. And one of the ideas is to start it in mermaid. So if I'm doing mermaid sitting on the reformer, I push away from the bar, I go into my stretch. People usually are in a pretty good curve when they start their mermaid. Not everybody, but most people. And you could have them hold this position, turn their palm up, and do a little bit of the tricep press. Ideally, we want the hand holding on to the strap, eventually to the handle, to be over the head a little bit so that the strap doesn't hit us in the face. A lot of people do it where the elbow is pointing up. Totally fine to do it that way. But it's not that next step. And I want to get people to where they're all the way over here to press up. So think about maybe starting some of these exercises in a different place. In mermaid. Mermaid's pretty easy for people. Maybe you give them a TheraBand, hold the TheraBand to the foot bar, hold the TheraBand in your hand, and you can do that just to start conditioning the tissues, start to put a little bit of load, get a little bit more mobility or control, whichever you need for that particular movement. And then the transition into something like suspending your entire body weight out against a spring will hopefully be a little bit better. I'm always trying to build those bridges and connections. And I know you guys have your own. So someday you guys have to teach me some of your favorite things. This is just my perspective on it. But I know you're doing these things on your own. And yes, it's okay. It's actually really, really good. So keep exploring. Oh, yeah. So Lisa was saying, I love the standing arm series. Sometimes my clients have pulled the hair out of their forearms. Isn't that the game where you say odd or even? Because the springs have gotten too close. Yes, absolutely. I've seen not only the springs pull on people's hair, but I've also seen it snag their clothing. So if you're noticing that the spring is rubbing over the top or under their arm, move it up or down a little bit, just an inch or two or a centimeter or two will bypass their body until maybe they have more strength or more mobility or more whatever it is in there's so many different bits of choreography, but move the spring a little bit because you don't want to make it uncomfortable for the person. It's hard enough already, right? So we don't want to do that. So just move the spring. If you don't have a crossbar on your trap table, that becomes a little bit challenging. So maybe you have a springboard. Maybe you do it with an elastic band, tie a knot in it, close it in a door jamb, and move that up and down. And maybe you don't use the springs at all. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you coming in and exploring the movement and asking your questions. We start back tomorrow with the transition intensive, the final 3 days of it, one of my favorite courses. So hope to see you at one of those soon, maybe. And we'll see you at the next Pilates Hour.